Introduction. Edward Muybridge speaks from the threshold Palo Alto, NT 78. The racetrack is quiet except for the wind, and 12 cameras stand like sentinels. A horse named Sally Gardner waits at one end of the track. Her muscles, a study in potential energy. When she runs, the world will divide and multiply at once. If we could let Edward Muybridge speak now with full knowledge of what his shudders unleashed, perhaps his voice found something like this. When I set those cameras in sequence, I thought I was proving only a wager that a horse, for the briefest instant, flies. But I see now that I was proving something far greater, that the eye itself could become mechanical, that time could be persuaded to reveal its hidden joints. Each frame was a confession from nature, an admission that motion is not continuous but composed, and in that composition lies thought. I did not photograph a horse. I photographed the idea of movement. He could not have known that the 12 exposures of Sally Gardner at a gallop would one day form a neuron map of cinema, or that the same logic would animate every future machine that learns to see. But from this distance, pick the sight-ray feeling product. Muybridge's shutters were early sedative. The camera array at Palo Alto was a nervous system stretched across a racetrack. In freezing the gallop, he created the first data set of consciousness, and he glimpsed the films that would descend from his work. And Weiser felt of a strange kinship with the directors who carried his experiment from Poland, with a tinge of his Mary, whose smoke chamber rims beast and move with security, with the Lumiere brothers, whose workers left the factory into eternal daylight, with the silent masters who made motion a form of prayer. He might have smiled at the Zilbalati's flow. It's animals moving through water like his horses through air, and understood a guess that they are descended from his experiment. He would see in their still, deliberate gestures of the course lectures that lesson began. A loadage of amplitudes of emotion, deafening words. And if for a moment he imagined him standing amid our digital skatery, watching streams of optical data cascade through neural networks, he might say, so this is what my shutters foretold. An era where light learns to interpret itself. If you have built thinking machines out of the same intervals I carved from time, your algorithms are my cameras multiplied, your pixels the descendants of my glass plates. But you have also built something more subtle, an art of empathy born from calculation. The horse I froze now looks when his soul was verdict, not a flesh for the video. Every creature you animate, every intelligence you teach to move, you always have supplied within. How the same impulse that made it last, where the all four hooves left the ground, became the same question we asked intelligent self. The regular learns begin to think. Muybridge was out from fever's massive loathsome but revelation. He stood on the threshold of the future he could barely name, a future that's long, that would let alone belong to bodies alone, but the images, signals, and data. In that sense, he was the first philosopher of the moving image, and his subject was always cognition. I thought I was on. The true experiment was with the mind. I thought I had stopped time. He might conclude, gazing at the luminous grids of 21st century code. But it was time that stopped for me, long enough to show that thought and motion are the same. And with that realization, the circle closes. Muybridge's galloping horse runs again, this time through the matrix of the digital age. Her body composed of light, a lineament coded in every film, every frame, every algorithm that seeks to understand the living movement of the world.
This essay follows the long arc of cinema's fascination with movement. From Edward Muybridge's 19th century chronophotography to Jint's Zilbaladi's flow. To argue that the filmic animal has always served as a prototype for artificial cognition. Muybridge's horse in motion marked the moment when life was first decomposed into discrete intervals of data. Establishing a visual logic that modern neural networks have inherited. Across a century of film, animals become laboratories for empathy and perception. Beings to whom audiences could experience thought without words. Drawing on film studies, media psychology and animal philosophy, from you expels wonders and inhibits electric animal to horror companion species. The paper explores how cinema's gnaw for expressive models. And that would explore convergence to you with the line. Now revolves perpetually in flow, where communication occurs entirely through river boys in meditation. The somatic animal will put us into an every form ballistic elephantly. I thought you an experiment of how sentient might feel before it speaks. Tracing this genealogy from chronophotography to cubition of business. Essay proposes that artificial intelligence is known as visual and lexical inspection. The moving image, it suggests our rehearsable hers machine's perception and the enduring question. First, asked by Muybridge's echoed by Zilbaladi's cat remains. How does motion become meaning?
The horse that learned to think. Muybridge and the birth of motion consciousness. Cinema begins not with a story, but with a question. What does motion know? In 1878, Edward Muybridge arranged a series of cameras along a racetrack at Palo Alto. A horse named Sally Gardner thundered past. The shutters snapped in sequence, and the world changed. The resulting strip of images, later published in his monumental Animal Locomotion, was both revelation and dissection, life cut into measurable instants. To the Victorians, Muybridge offered proof that all four hooves left the ground in mid-gallop. To us, he offered something stranger, an epistemology of seeing from interruption. Each photograph is a fragment, is a magic's continuity. Between them lies the first cinemated unconscious, the dark gap where motion becomes mind. Etienne Jules Mary, his French contemporary, refined the acting for physiology. Chronic radiography as pulse study. Respiration rendered in silver nitrate. Mary runs from what runs on it. Muybridge wanted to catch it. Together they created the nervous system of cinema. Imaginating games among parts of reflection. Body of that plastic bridge. In their laboratories of glass plates and trigger wires, the atom became our first mirror. A century before neural networks,
These men train machines to perceive patterns of life, to find intelligence in velocity. The horse was no longer a symbol of power or war. It was the first algorithmic subject to make such an equation in muscle, light and noir. And in the meticulous austerity of experiments, we glimpse the germ of a later symbolic faith. The belief that stripping away artificer weaves something sacred in the real that a camera left to watch motions name might record the soul neither. From that meaning, faith would grow a tradition of filterness, who trust the emergence of the Latin ornament, who build philosophy for the sentence of Rothman. The lineage runs quietly forward through silent reels and hand lephisters into our own century's meditation on a more mind and the botanical gaze.
The animal is the first machine of empathy. Long before algorithms learned to mimic feeling, cinema taught us to recognize it in fur, feathers, and muscle. The animal on screen was humanity's first empathy interface, an early prototype of what we would later call artificial intelligence. When John Berger wrote that the look between animal and man has been extinguished, he was describing not extinction, but transference. The gaze re-emerged in the flicker of film stock projected back at us from eyes that could never answer yet seemed to understand. Akira Mizuta Lippitt called the cinema a refuge of animal being. He meant that as a terrestrial world drove animals from daily life, their vitality migrated into moving images. Horses, dogs, birds, lions, each became an emissary from a vanishing reality. Film preserved them the way a dream preserves a heartbeat in translation, not imitation. To watch them was to feel the trace of instinct of modernity and exile. Psychologically, the mechanism is simple and profound. The viewer's mirror neurons fire when an animal moves with visible intention. The nervous system reads gesture as motive. Empathy arrives not through identification. Few of us know what it is to fly or gallop, but through rhythm. Motion becomes syntax, cadence becomes comprehension. We do not speak the animal's language, but we pulse in time with it. This is the first lesson of cinematic empathy and perhaps the earliest rehearsal for our current fascination with filthened minds. Each frame of an animal behaving naturally trains us to read meaning into behavior, to project consciousness where there may be none. Every cut between predator and prey anticipates the feedback loop of stimulus and response that will one day define the learning algorithm. When we wept for Bambi or trembled before the shark in Jaws, we were practicing a kind of cross-species theory of mind. The same interpretive generosity that now fuels our relationship with machines. The best free Lakers understand this intuitively. They film on the animal as presence, not prop. They let the creature's gaze remain alien enough to remind us that empathy is an act of translation, not possession. From Flaherty's patient dogs and not at the ooze of a fox and Tarkovsky's stalker, the lens becomes a medium of listening. The quieter the frame, the louder the awareness that aesthetic restraint, trusting gesture over exposition, and the former shadows, the middle-lows that would later harden into manifestos. A belief that truth appears when artifice retreats. The animal taught cinema that looking can itself be moral.